the report had 4 key recommendations, and the first one, which I hope wouldn't surprise anybody viewing this, is that the pedagogy must lead what's happening with the technology. It shouldn't be the other way around. So the use of technology must have a purpose. There must be a sound rationale for introducing the technology into the classroom. I think we'll be talking a bit more about this later, but there must be a clear plan for implementation, including thinking about resources and the training of teachers and also the pupils, and what support might be required during the implementation of the technology in the classroom. It's also important to think about cost-benefit analysis. There are all sorts of ways that you can address a problem, and technology might be one of them, but it might be equally as effective as an alternative method, which perhaps costs less. And therefore, we all know that schools have limited funds available, and it might be more beneficial not to use technology in certain circumstances. So you do need to consider that. As well as pedagogy being key, the context in which the technology is being used is also key. So a lot of the research that's undertaken might be with particular groups of students, might be in particular countries, and even in the same country, one classroom can be very different from another classroom. So you need to take that into account, the sort of contextual factors when you're implementing technology in the classroom. And you also need to think about whether or not the technology is going to be used to supplement or enhance the teaching that's taking place, or whether it's going to replace something, and if so, what it's going to replace and what the implications of that replacement are. So the other 3 key recommendations are around the pedagogical ways in which to use technology. So the first one is the use of technology to improve the quality of explanations and modelling. There's quite a lot of research evidence out there that suggests that it has a very strong positive impact on learning. So that's things like the use of visualizations and interactive systems. So using something simple like a visualizer, using video in presentations and so on, and simulations, which have proved to be particularly useful in subject areas such as mathematics and science. And quite a strong positive impact of that kind of technology in those subject areas. But whatever happens, the explanations, the teacher is still key. The explanations and the modelling and the way in which it's presented to the students needs to be clear. It needs to be relevant to the learning objectives, and it needs to be accessible to all students in the classroom. So the third recommendation is about pupil practice and how technology lends itself to supporting pupil practice. And there, again, there's substantial evidence of the positive impact of this. And we've been using technology to facilitate pupil practice for decades. The first kind of learning systems that came out in the 60s and 70s were about this kind of use of technology in the classroom. So the technology can help to improve the quality and the quantity of practice, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. So for homework, for example, and it's the quantity of exposure or practice that really is key here, and extending that opportunity for students to carry on learning and practicing and put their knowledge into practice and so on. That is quite key. So again, using those kinds of technologies for homework, revision activities and so on. So as we all know, and as people have talked about for decades, again, technology can be engaging and motivating for students, but not always. So its use does need to be monitored on a regular basis. And that, again, ties into the use of the technologies that you can use for practice and so on. And then some systems, and we can see the developments over time. Intelligent tutoring systems have been around for a long time, but the technologies have become more commonplace in classrooms now. So adaptive systems, challenging students at different levels, so adapting to wherever they are in their learning journey, and enabling them to move forward and so on, rather than every student going through the same kind of activities and repeating something that everybody else is doing. So sort of activities that this can support, things like retrieval practice and self-quizzing. That leads me on to the fourth recommendation, which is about feedback and the use of technology to support that. In the work that I did that underpinned this report, which was a systematic review of the evidence, there wasn't very much around in relation to assessment, but we know from other sources, we know from practitioners, we know from, I was looking at particular kinds of studies. I was looking at what we call meta-analyses, which are studies that bring together large numbers of quantitative research reports. And so if there are studies that are qualitative, which are equally valid in terms of providing evidence of effectiveness, they weren't included in my synthesis of the evidence. So we've drawn on a lot of other sources in order to underpin this fourth recommendation. But, it can support speed and accuracy of assessment, enabling teachers to make decisions, in a timely manner. It can also help teachers from the perspective of reducing their workload, and it can provide direct and immediate feedback to students while they're using the systems, and enable them to move further. And again, these sort of examples are things like quizzes and questioning, but teachers can also use technologies in all sorts of other ways to support assessment and feedback. So audio recording or video recording feedback and so on.